Hey friends, it's David with Remnant Homestead. I'm just out putting up some feed I had delivered from an Amish feed mill, and I got some goat and some layer delivered, and I'm putting that up. And while I'm doing that, I've got my puppy out with me, and Henry's running around, and he's definitely into a little bit of everything. He's only about 8 months now, so he's still kind of into everything. And I'm trying to keep a good eye on him just because we've got, ticks out here, and they carry Lyme. And I've had a lot of personal experience with Lyme, and a lot of experience within my community with Lyme. So I kind of wanted to talk about that for a minute because I think there's a lot of misunderstood facts about Lyme's disease and about deer ticks in general. I live in a county that's the second highest deer population in the state, and we definitely get our fair share of deer traveling through the property, and therefore we get a good percentage of deer ticks. Forgive me, I'm fighting off of some sinus infection, but because of that, I had to do a lot of research. My kids would come in on the weekends when they're with me, and they would have deer ticks on them, and I have deer tick pullers. They're kind of like a spoon puller. They work really well, even for the almost microscopic deer ticks that you can get out here. And what I wanted to talk about was recognizing the symptoms of Lyme's. I've had people at church and people within my community be symptomatic and not know that it was Lyme, and had honestly come up with a lot of different theories as to what was wrong with them, and were just wrong. And I kept assuring them, I said, I don't know, it sure sounds like Lyme. And sure enough, it was. So some people that I know, some people that are pretty close to me, and some neighbors even, had symptoms of seizures. Okay, so they looked like they had strokes, and they had some heart arrhythmias. Those were the telltale symptoms for them. But it can look like fatigue. It can look like a lot of different things in different people. So I would never assume that, because you don't have a specific symptom, that you do not have Lyme. Not everybody knows this, but goats can carry Lyme. They can be infected with Lyme and carry it and be asymptomatic. So, your goats are susceptible to Lyme, just like your dogs. As far as I know, cats are not. But I think a lot of people think when, the leaves start changing and it starts getting cooler, that your concern about the ticks is over. That is not the case. This is the worst time of year for deer ticks. They prefer cooler climate. So on a blazing hot 90-degree day, you're probably not even going to see deer ticks, most likely. I mean, if you live where I live, at least, it's generally temperatures in the 60s that they prefer. So during hunting season, I've come out of the woods and been absolutely crawling with deer ticks and not see any dog ticks this time of year. So something to definitely, consider. One of the ways that you can manage the deer ticks on your property is by using what are called tick tubes. I believe it was a agricultural university in Illinois, could be Iowa. I always get the two confused for some reason, but the eyes have it, I suppose. But they had done some research, and they found that deer ticks were primarily carried in the nymph stage by mice. And so eradicating it on mice will eradicate it on your property. So in the nymph stage, when the deer ticks hatch, they will live on tiny little scurrying animals, primarily mice, chipmunks, squirrels, raccoons, some, possums a little bit. That's also another falsehood, that possums eat ticks, and possums will not eat more ticks than they will carry. Okay, it's just their preening will eliminate some of them, but they're also spreading them more than they're eliminating them. So that's just nonsense for people who love possums and want to justify their existence, I suppose. I don't know, but I have nothing against possums, but I'm just telling you, they're not going to eradicate ticks for you, and neither will guinea fowl. Guinea fowl will not eliminate more than they'll carry. So that stuff is just kind of homestead nonsense. I don't know how that nonsense gets spread. I've heard it for 14 years. Oh yeah, guinea fowl will get rid of ticks and possums get rid of ticks. It's not true. So what the university studies showed were that small mammals that move fast for whatever reason, it tends to be, squirrels, chipmunks, mice, voles, they tend to be the nursery for the deer tick. So obviously you can't eradicate all the mice, voles, chipmunks, squirrels, etc. But what you can do is put out tick tubes. And what that is it's toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls stuffed with cotton balls that have been soaked in permethrin, 20% solution. You can get it at Tractor Supply, you can get it at Rural King if you got a Rural King around you. And you just soak the cotton balls in permethrin, stuff it in the tubes, and then put it in various areas on your property. I didn't intend this, but this is actually one of the places that I put them. I've got a forsythia bush back behind me here. I got another bigger one down beside the house, and then I put them under the chicken coop. I put them in the barn. I put them under the goat barn. I don't want to put them in the goat barn just because I don't want the mice pulling out the cotton balls and spreading it, making nests in the barns for the goats. But my bigger barn, I put them, probably 3 or 4 of them in there because I get a lot of mice in there. And I've got the Dipsy Diver, 5-gallon bucket mouse traps in there and everything. But my goal isn't to eliminate mice. My goal is to eliminate deer ticks. So that's what I do. I have an old hog pen. It's covered, and I'll stuff some tubes in there. And I've put the tick tubes out and come back like 2 hours later, and the mice have already found it. And the evidence of that is they'll pull the cotton balls out, and there'll be cotton balls, some of them torn, some of them just, pulled out, and others missing. So they are finding it almost immediately. And they will take it and make a nest out of it. And that nest is now covered in permethrin. So the ticks are rubbing up against that, and they are getting those ticks killed on them. And that'll stay on them for a while. You can do the same thing with deer feeders and paint rollers. I don't recommend doing that. You have to check with your state laws. There is some legality involved in treating wildlife, particularly during hunting season. So you're supposed to remove those in the states where it's permitted. You're supposed to remove them around hunting season. And they make fancy ones that you can buy. And if your community is a pretty close community and you have an issue with deer ticks in your community, I suggest talking to some neighbors. They're pretty expensive. I mean, they're not prohibitively expensive. I mean, $1,600 if you've got a big farm, it's definitely worthwhile to put one of those on there. And essentially what it is it's a deer feeder that's got 2 paint rollers on either side, and the deer put their head in to the feeder, and when they do so, they're getting treated, and primarily on their ears, which is actually where the deer tick tend to be most active. So on and around the ears and the neck. So as the deer feed, they're getting treated, it's killing the ticks, and it will control the population, absolutely. But that is something you have to look into on a state-by-state basis. I don't recommend just doing that all willy-nilly or DIYing something like that unless you know it's permitted and when to remove it. So that if you are treating those animals with permethrin, it's not in their system during the hunting season when people could be harvesting that animal. So that's a consideration for the deer. But the mice, that's kind of a free-for-all. I don't know anybody has any limitations on doing tick tubes. So I get a lot of questions about that with my, I've mentioned it to my neighbors. I've talked about it with friends, and I get a lot of questions about, well, how many, and how do you do a big area? And you're not going to really do that to cover your entire property if you have any sizable property. If you've got an acre, okay, I mean, it's relatively easy to maintain it, but once you get above 5 acres, the amount of tick tubes that you'd have to put out, to really completely eradicate it, that'd be a lot of effort. So I'll typically do about anywhere from 20 to 30 tick tubes in the spring, and then I kind of follow up towards the end of summer. And I have absolutely, definitively proven that this works for myself. All my neighbors get plenty of deer ticks, and I've been doing this tick tube method for, it's been at least 3 years, possibly 4 years, and it absolutely works, 100%. Like, the deer ticks are almost non-existent. Occasionally I'll pick up one, but see one on an animal, or the kids will be out playing and they'll bring one in, but it's pretty rare. It's really pretty rare at this point. So I highly recommend the tick tubes. There's a lot of videos out there on how to make them. I'm not going to do a video on it. They already exist. Plenty of people have already done that. It's very useful information. It does work, and I highly recommend it. But I mentioned the goats carrying Lyme, and I think that's something that if you are a goat breeder, you should be keeping an eye on, because a lot of people just don't treat their goats for Lyme. They don't do any kind of preventative. I don't see anybody running around with flea and tick collars on their goats, and I don't recommend that. The best way to control it is to control it in the nymph stage, to lower the numbers and lower the odds. The symptoms in goats, just like with people, it can be varied. It can be lethargic behavior. It can be a lot of different things you won't necessarily know. And if you've got a decent herd, or who's going to have the money to get every animal tested, and who's actually doing the testing. So another resource, when this really started to be a problem on my property, if my kids got bit by a deer tick, I would pull the tick and I would send it to ticktest.com. And it's an organization, I believe they're in Pennsylvania, and they will test it for a fee. I believe it's $50. They'll test it for Lyme. And initially, when I started testing, all of the ticks that I had pulled off my kids came back negative. And then I had one that was on my daughter 2 years ago that tested positive. She had no symptoms. I probably caught it, quick enough that it wasn't able to transmit. But $50 sounds like a lot, to be doing that test frequently. And I was really doing that and spending that money just to determine how prevalent it was in my area. And I'm actually pretty pleased to say that for as many people as I know that have contracted Lyme, around me, and as many deer ticks as there are, it still seems to be, at least on my property, low prevalence, statistically speaking. So, of the probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 tests that I had done, I'd say 3 of them came back positive with Lyme. So, not every tick is going to carry Lyme, but it is a risk. That service is a great service because, you can test for a myriad, anaplasmosis. You can test for a lot of different spirochetes that tick, a lot of tick-borne illnesses in general. But you can send as many ticks as you want. They will not test each one individually. What they do is they put them all together, they grind them up. I called and talked to them about the whole process to kind of validate their lab process, and they know what they're doing. It's a great organization. I highly recommend it. But they'll take all of them, put them together, and test all of them. So if one of them tests positive, the test comes back positive, and you won't know which one. So if you had one was on a kid and one was just crawling around, and you want to know if the one that was on your child was carrying Lyme, you can. So I would send that. That would be 2 tests, is how you'd want to do that. So, but otherwise, you can just put them in a Ziploc bag, put a whole bunch of them in there, and see, if it comes back positive or not. And that'll kind of give you an idea of how prevalent it is in your area. I have had one neighbor who had essentially stroke symptoms. I had a family member who had a literal stroke from Lymes. So that could be your first indication that you have Lyme. It's not something to mess around with, folks. You got to take it really seriously, because I believe I'm probably, I developed some really bad arthritis kind of symptoms 2021, and it got so bad I could barely open up, a milk container or anything. I could barely use my hands, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I developed a heart arrhythmia. And, it never occurred to me, as much as I know and have been following that subject, that it was Lyme. I also want to mention, if you happen to live in the Northeast, watch out for Powassan. It is everything you fear about a tick-borne illness. So the problem with Powassan, I believe there has been 1 fatality in upstate New York, but it came from Powassan, Canada, and it's kind of come down into the U.S. and it's close. It's close to Ohio, so who knows how long it's going to take it to spread. But when I lived in Virginia, 1997, 1998, I believe they said that the prevalence in my county in Virginia was 1 in 7 people had Lyme. And that was obviously quite a while ago. There was no deer ticks in Ohio. It had spread, deer ticks had spread to Ohio. So if you know the whole origin of Lyme, it came out of Lymes, Connecticut. There's all sorts of conspiracy about that. You can look it up for yourself. The CDC looked into it and said that it wasn't from a biolab, but who knows? I'm not going to delve into that, but this Powassan virus is basically life-threatening encephalitis, is what it transmits, and it's. I looked into it. I think the CDC said it was like 80% fatal. In the initial reports that I had seen on it a few years ago. So that's a pretty concerning one. So ticks are nothing to mess around with. Tick tubes work. They work. Even the dog ticks, the bigger ticks. Some people call them wood ticks. Some people call them dog ticks. Whatever you want to call them. The bigger ticks, more common ones. They can transmit anaplasmosis. There's even people who say that they can transmit Lyme. And any tick-borne illness is dangerous. So definitely something to think about. If you've got property, recommend the tick tubes. Google it. Look it up on YouTube. You'll find plenty of videos on how to make them. Highly recommend it for your farm, to protect your animals and to protect your family. I hope this is helpful. I hate seeing this. It's an epidemic in my area. It really is. I've had one neighbor who was almost ended up with a pacemaker, and at the last minute they did a test, and it turned out that the heart arrhythmia was due to Lyme, and they haven't had a heart problem since they were treated. So the great masquerader, some people call it, it can appear as a lot of different illnesses. Get tested. Get tested if you live in an area that's got a lot of Lyme and got a lot of deer ticks. But also, be aware that it can affect your animals as well. Tick tubes, probably the best way that I know of to eradicate it, and it's worked on my property. So I hope this is helpful to somebody. God bless y'all.